Welcome back to the deep dive. So you sent over this document that's, well, it seems to be generating quite a bit of buzz.
Yeah, this new presidential executive order.
Exactly. Focused on workforce optimization in the federal bureaucracy. Sounds pretty official.
It does.
Our goal today is really just to, unpack it. Try to cut through the jargon and figure out what this order is actually setting in motion.
Right, because this isn't just like another policy memo. It's dated February 11th, 2025, and it really signals a potentially significant shift in how the federal government might operate.
And the stated goal, right up front in Section 1.
Yeah, it says the aim is to restore accountability to the American public, basically by tackling waste, bloat, and making things work better for families, workers, and taxpayers.
Okay, so restoring accountability. Let's dig into how they plan to do that. Starting with the basics. Section 2, the definitions.
Good place to start. First up, agency. Seems obvious, but how does the order define it? Well, it points to the U.S. Code, Title 44, Section 3502, which, is pretty broad, covers most departments' independent establishments in the executive branch.
Okay, so the usual suspects.
Mostly. But here's a key exclusion.
Oh.
The executive office of the president itself, it's not included in this definition of agency.
Okay, so the folks working directly for the president are carved out. It's more about the wider federal department.
Exactly. It targets the broader bureaucracy.
Got it. And agency head. That sounds straightforward.
It is, basically. Just the top person, secretary, administrator, director, whatever their title is, unless the order says otherwise for a specific point.
Makes sense. Now, this next one caught my eye. DOGE team lead. What's that about?
Yeah, the name stands out. It actually links back to an earlier executive order, 14158. That one established the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE.
DOGE.
So the DOGE team lead is essentially the point person within each agency. Their job is to drive and oversee these workforce optimization efforts.
So like an internal efficiency czar for each department.
Sort of, yeah. We'll see their role pop up quite a bit as we go through this.
Okay. And what about the people actually doing the work? How's employee defined?
Again, it points back to the law. Title 5, Section 2105 of the U.S. Code. It's a standard definition covering most people serving in the executive branch who fit the legal criteria. Doesn't really matter if they're permanent, full-time, or other categories we'll touch on.
Right. Now, there are also these very specific definitions for immigration enforcement and law enforcement. Why pull those out separately?
Yeah, this is really important, especially when we get to hiring and potential job cuts later. Immigration enforcement is defined pretty narrowly. It's about investigating and enforcing laws related to, say, unlawful presence or illegal entry.
Okay.
But, and this seems crucial, the definition explicitly excludes things like helping people with immigration benefits or any actions that might hinder enforcement or deportation.
So a very clear focus on the enforcement side, not the service side.
Seems that way. It signals a clear prioritization.
Interesting. And law enforcement, how's that defined?
It's kind of two-pronged. First, the traditional stuff. Investigating, prosecuting, incarcerating folks who violate the law. And second, it also covers protecting government officials, federal, state, local, even foreign dignitaries from threats.
Okay, so pretty broad, covering policing and protection.
Right.
And the last couple of definitions here, temporary employee and reemployed annuitant?
Yeah, specific job categories.
Yeah.
Temporary employee is just someone hired for a limited time. The order points to the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR, for the details.
Okay.
And a reemployed annuitant is someone who retired from federal service but has been hired back. Again, defined in the CFR.
Got it. So remembering those categories might be useful later.
Definitely, especially when we talk about potential workforce reductions.
All right, definitions covered. Let's move into the real meat here. Section 3, reforming the federal workforce. First up, the hiring ratio. This sounds like a big deal.
It really is. It builds on a presidential memo from January 20th, 2025. That memo apparently put a hiring freeze in place.
Okay, so building on an existing freeze.
Exactly. And now the Office of Management and Budget OMB is tasked with creating a plan. The goal is workforce reduction through efficiency and, people leaving naturally, attrition, the core mechanism, this 1 in 4 hiring ratio.
1 in 4. So for every 4 people who leave.
Only one new person can generally be hired to replace them.
Wow. That could seriously slow down hiring, couldn't it?
Absolutely. It would really limit an agency's ability to just maintain its current size, let alone grow.
But there are exceptions, right? You mentioned some areas might be treated differently.
Yes, very important exceptions. First, this ratio does not affect whatever hiring freeze is already happening at the IRS. That's separate.
Okay.
And crucially, consistent with those definitions we just discussed, it also doesn't apply to roles in public safety, immigration enforcement, or law enforcement.
So those priority areas are shielded from this hiring restriction.
That's right. They seem to be ring-fenced. So while many agencies might feel the pinch, these specific functions are protected.
And there's another layer too. Something about a federal hiring plan.
Yes, any hiring that does happen still needs to follow the rules set out in another executive order, 14170. That one was also from January 20th and focused on reforming the hiring process itself, emphasizing merit.
So even with fewer hires, they have to stick to merit-based principles.
Okay. Quality over quantity, perhaps, is the idea.
Okay, let's move to the next part. Hiring approval. Sounds like getting a new hire approved might get more complicated.
It does look that way. Agency heads now need to develop hiring plans, and these plans need to be data-driven.
Data-driven, how so?
Well, they have to consult with their agency's DOGE team lead. Remember them.
The efficiency person.
Right. And the focus is explicitly on directing any new career hires to highest need areas.
So not just filling any open slot, but strategically targeting critical roles.
Exactly. It's meant to be more deliberate.
And does this DOGE team lead have actual power here?
It seems so. The order says agencies basically can't fill a career vacancy if the DOGE team lead advises against it,
Really?
unless the agency head, the top boss, specifically overrides that advice.
So the DOGE lead has significant influence, a sort of soft veto.
You could put it that way. And to track all this, each DOGE team lead has to send a monthly hiring report to the USDS administrator, presumably the head of the U.S. Digital Service, or a related entity overseeing this.
Okay, so tighter controls on hiring. Now the next subsection, reductions in force, RIS. That term always gets attention.
It does, and this order is pretty explicit. It directs agency heads to, quote, promptly undertake preparations to initiate large-scale RIFs.
Large scale, that sounds significant.
It certainly implies more than just minor adjustments. Of course, it adds the caveat that this must be done consistent with all the applicable laws and regulations that govern RIFs.
Right, there are established processes for this, but the direction is to get ready for big cuts.
That's the message, yes. Agencies are expected to start planning.
And does it say who might be first in line if these RIFs happen?
It does give some prioritization. It says agencies should prioritize separating temporary employees and those re-employed annuitants we defined earlier,
Okay.
specifically in areas that are likely to see RIFs anyway.
That makes sense. From a management perspective, maybe easier to implement cuts there first.
Potentially, yes. More flexibility, perhaps.
The order also lists specific types of offices or initiatives targeted for these potential RIFs. What's on that list?
Yeah, this is quite revealing. First, any office or function that isn't explicitly required by a law, by statute.
Okay, so non-mandated functions.
Right. Then, maybe the most talked about one, all agency, diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI initiatives are specifically listed.
All DEI initiatives. Wow. Okay.
Also on the list.
Oh.
Any agency initiatives or operations that the administration has already suspended or decided to close down.
Makes sense.
And finally, it includes non-essential employees, the ones identified in OMB contingency plans for government shutdowns.
So that gives a pretty clear idea of the administration's priorities for scaling back.
It does seem to outline specific targets.
And just to reiterate, the exemptions apply here too, right?
Yeah.
Public safety, immigration, law enforcement.
Exactly, same carve-out. Those functions are explicitly excluded from this RIF directive. They appear protected on both the hiring and firing fronts.
Got it. Okay, moving on. Within Section 3, there's rulemaking. The Office of Personnel Management, OPM, is involved here.
Yes. OPM is tasked within 30 days to start the process of revising the rules about who is considered suitable for federal employment.
Revising suitability criteria. What kinds of changes are they proposing?
They're looking to add several criteria to the existing list.
Such as?
Things like failing to comply with your legal obligations. The example given is not paying your taxes.
Okay. Seems reasonable for a federal job.
Also, failing to meet basic prerequisites like U.S. citizenship were required.
Right. What else?
Another one is refusing to certify that you'll follow applicable non-disclosure agreements consistent with whistleblower protections. It notes or actually failing to follow them once employed.
Okay. Focus on confidentiality.
And finally, things like theft or misuse of government resources, or even negligently losing significant government property or funds.
So really tightening up on accountability, conduct, and basic requirements.
That seems to be the thrust of these proposed changes, yeah.
Okay. The last part of Section 3 is about developing agency reorganization plans. What's involved here?
This requires agency heads, also within 30 days, to report to OMB. They need to identify every single law that mandates the existence of their agency or any part of it.
Every law.
And crucially, the report must also discuss whether the agency or parts of it should be eliminated or maybe consolidated with others.
So a fundamental review of whether each piece is still needed or could be merged.
Exactly. It suggests a potential for some serious structural reorganization down the line, a top-to-bottom look at efficiency and necessity.
That sounds like a massive undertaking. And is there a check-in on how this whole order is working?
Yes, Section 3F. Within 240 days, the USDS administrator, again, likely related to government tech and efficiency oversight, has to report back to the president. The report should cover how implementation is going and, importantly, recommend whether the order should be continued, changed, or even scrapped.
So there's a built-in review period. It's not necessarily set in stone forever.
Correct. Subject to review and potential adjustment based on that report.
Okay, let's move to Section 4, exclusions. We've touched on some, but let's clarify who is definitely not covered.
Right. First and most clearly, military personnel. Uniformed services are explicitly excluded.
Big group there. Not affected.
Correct. Also, agency heads get some discretion.
How so?
They can exempt specific positions if they decide they're absolutely necessary for national security, homeland security, or public safety.
Okay, a safety valve for critical roles.
Exactly. To ensure essential functions aren't hampered?
And OPM can grant exemptions too.
Yes, the OPM director has authority to grant other necessary exemptions, but with a key condition. These exemptions should still aim to promote the overall goal of workforce reduction.
Interesting. So exceptions are possible, but still within the spirit of optimization.
That seems to be the intent.
All right, final section. Section 5, general provisions, kind of the legal boilerplate at the end.
Pretty much, but still important. First, it clarifies this order doesn't override any existing legal powers of agencies or their heads.
Okay.
Nor does it interfere with the OMB director's duties regarding budget, administration, or legislation. It operates within the existing framework.
Standard stuff. What else?
Implementation depends on two big things. It must follow applicable law, obviously.
Right.
And crucially, it's subject to the availability of appropriations.
The money. Congress holds the purse strings.
Always. So how much of this actually happens could depend on funding allocated by Congress.
Good point. And the last part seems quite significant about legal rights.
Yes, Section 5C. This is very common in executive orders. It states clearly that this order does not create any new rights or benefits that someone could sue the government over.
So you can't take the government to court saying, hey, you didn't follow this specific part of the workforce optimization order?
Essentially, no. It's an internal directive for the executive branch, not a basis for private lawsuits against the government.
Okay, got it. So we've walked through this whole executive order on workforce optimization. For you listening, the big takeaway seemed to be a major potential reshaping of the federal workforce is being initiated here.
Yeah, through things like that restrictive 1-in-4 hiring ratio.
Mandates for agencies to prepare for possible large-scale RIFs, especially targeting areas like DEI initiatives or non-statutory functions.
Proposed changes to make suitability criteria for federal jobs stricter.
And this requirement for agencies to review their entire structure, looking for potential eliminations or consolidations.
And really important to remember those key exemptions we kept mentioning.
Right. Public safety, immigration enforcement, law enforcement largely shielded from the hiring slowdown, and the RIF directives.
And just to be clear, we've focused today purely on what's in this document you shared. No outside speculation or opinions layered on top.
Exactly, just unpacking the order itself.
Yeah.
So the final thought for you to chew on, considering all these potential changes, the restrictions, the RIF preparations, the reorganization reviews, what might the long-term impact be?
Yeah, how could this affect the overall efficiency, maybe even the scope of the federal government?
And maybe more personally, how might that filter down to affect the actual services and interactions you have with federal agencies in the future.
Definitely something to watch as this unfolds.
Absolutely. Thanks for diving deep with us today.